Hi, welcome to the North Carolina Department of Public Safety, Division of Juvenile Justice, Community Programs, Juvenile Crime Prevention Council Policy Training. Wow, that was a mouthful. Anyway, my name is Pam Stokes, and I'm the lead consultant for the Eastern and Central areas. Today's training will be conducted by Terrence Spain, who is a consultant for Districts 6 and 7, Trinice Towns, who is a consultant in District 1 and in Pitt County, Bill Batchelor, who's your consultant in District 2, and Nancy Hodges, who's your consultant in District 3B, District 4, which includes Duplin and Jones County, and District 8. Today's training objectives will be, we will review and highlight the prominent changes in the Juvenile Crime Prevention Council policy. We will also describe the policy feedback process, and we will also describe the affirmation process and the deadline. The first big change in the Juvenile Crime Prevention Council policies is in operations. We will talk about the transfer and disposal of equipment purchased with JCPC funds. If the equipment is no longer needed by the Department of Public Safety, Juvenile Crime Prevention Council funded program, or it becomes available due to the closure of a program, the Juvenile Crime Prevention Council, with approval of the county and the Department of Public Safety, may consider the following options. 1, transfer the equipment to another Department of Public Safety, Juvenile Crime Prevention Council funded program within the county. Or, if the Juvenile Crime Prevention Council or another Department of Public Safety Juvenile Crime Prevention Council funded program within the county does not need the equipment, transfer the equipment to another youth serving agency within the county. Or 3, request that the county sell the property and transfer revenues to another Department of Public Safety Juvenile Crime Prevention Council funded program within the county. Or 4, request that the county take possession of the property for use by a non-Department of Public Safety Juvenile Crime Prevention Council funded program and provide the fair market value of the property to another Department of Public Safety Juvenile Crime Prevention Council program within the county. Or 5, surplus or non-operative equipment shall be disposed of in accordance with the county's surplus equipment policy. Any revenue thus generated shall be returned to the program for which the equipment was purchased. Also, each Department of Public Safety Juvenile Crime Prevention Council funded program shall abide by its own sponsoring agency's policy for capital expenditures. If no sponsoring agency policy exists, then the county government shall establish a policy and the program shall abide by the county government policy. This would be a good opportunity for you to develop your own policy. Still under Juvenile Crime Prevention Council operations, under the request for proposal, the Juvenile Crime Prevention Council shall develop and distribute a request for proposal to solicit applications for funding based upon the planning process that identifies the elevated community and juvenile risks, service gaps, deficits or barriers, and service priorities for the Department of Public Safety and the local match funds. The request for proposal shall also include prioritizations of the risk factors, prioritizations of the needed dispositional options, application format and the location, and the date of the request for proposal publication. Also to be included in the request for proposal is the application deadline and the submission details. Also, the contact information for obtaining technical assistance or directing questions about the request for proposal, and the total amount available of funds and the match requirements. The request for proposal shall be published locally for a minimum of 30 days from the first publication to the due date for the applications. The request for proposal should be distributed to the Juvenile Crime Prevention Council membership and other youth-serving agencies. Additional requests for proposals may be required during the funding year if the Juvenile Crime Prevention Council agencies seek to solicit new program proposals for established funding priorities with unallocated or otherwise available Department of Public Safety funds, or they adopt additional priorities for funding. We are still on Juvenile Crime Prevention Council Policy 2, Program Operational Requirements. Now added in the evaluation procedures that each agency's internal procedures or evaluation design that measures the program success, effectiveness, and ability to address the underlying cause of delinquent and undisciplined behavior. These procedures and evaluation designs shall include, at a minimum, the expected benefits of the program, the specific data that will be measured to document success, and a specific schedule for measuring and reporting results. Also changes are the parental involvement. Programs shall involve parents and/or legal guardians by setting expectations of their involvement and the agency's efforts to encourage client and family engagement in services. Okay, now let's move on to JCPC Policy 2, Program Operational Requirements. DPS-funded programs shall adhere to operational procedures that strengthen program delivery and development. Programs shall adhere to Department of Public Safety, Juvenile Crime Prevention Council policies and procedures concerning employment of staff, criminal background checks, credentialing of staff, operating the program, and licensing requirements. The new addition to that is funded agencies shall develop procedures to ensure that criminal history and reference checks are used as a condition of employment for staff, interns, contractors, and volunteers. Also, safe driving record and valid license are required for individuals transporting juveniles. This needs to be updated annually, and a copy of the license in the employee files. Number 17, overnight events or field trips. Procedures for securing written parental consent, medical waiver, or consent for treatment, releases, or other forms relative to each off-site activity or event that has not been previously included in the scope of the program activities or services originally described in the participant agreement signed by the parent. They shall get additional detailed supervision requirements secured for that specific event. Teen court programs shall also include guidelines and procedures for overnight events or field trips involving youth volunteers.
Let's continue discussing program operational requirements, beginning at section 2.3, policy number 19. This section addresses new policy areas that must be included in all JCPC program policies. The first being juvenile supervision. Programs shall describe their practices for supervising juveniles during program activities and transportation. Next, JCPC programs will also be required to have a policy on social media, specifically the agency's social media presence and how an agency will protect the confidentiality of clients, parents, and participants. Programs also must include policies defining appropriate boundaries for all participants of the program.
New to the program operational requirements is the non-discrimination policy, that's number 21. Programs must develop policies to ensure that within its target population and developmental parameters, no person shall be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subject to discrimination in any service or activity on the basis of race, color, sex, religion, creed, political belief, national origin, linguistic and/or language difference, gender identity, including gender expression, socioeconomic status, height, weight, marital or family status, or disability. Also added to this section is a requirement that programs now develop policies around the critical standards that will be covered throughout policy, and to have those available in their operating requirements section.
Next, we will review the section on records in 2.4 Part A. This policy now allows for juvenile records to be stored in a paper form or digitally. Also in section 2.4 Part D, policies 1 through 19 address the requirements for documentation in each juvenile file. Many of the changes in this area are clarifications. Under authority to contract with other entities, Section 2.7, professional services has also been revised for clarification. Under organizational employment practices in Section 2.8, Policy A6E, a policy change was made by removing the requirement of drug screens for staff and volunteers. Lastly, in Section 2.8, Part B, are clarifications made for licenses and certification requirements.
Section 3, which covers the oversight and monitoring of programs, has been clarified to provide updated requirements and procedures related to non-critical program standard violations as well as critical program standard violations. Section 3, Oversight and Monitoring. The purpose is to establish minimum standards for JCPC for effective and efficient operations, as well as to establish operational procedures that provide structure to the local JCPC and DPS in monitoring and evaluating programs. One change within the monitoring of programs, on-site monitoring of programs by the consultant, is that the consultant will be reviewing a minimum of 6 active cases and a minimum of 6 terminated cases. Within Section 3.5, Program Standard Violation, one big change in that is now includes the Board of Directors when applicable in reporting, but we recommend that you review in its entirety Section 3.5 Program Standard Violation, Part A Non-Critical Program Standard Violation, and Part B Critical Program Standard Violation. Section 3, which covers the oversight and monitoring of programs, has been clarified to provide updated requirements and procedures related to non-critical program standard violations as well as critical program standard violations. Section 4, Program Reporting Requirements, now requires that the program notify JCPC and DPS area office within 5 business days for possible follow-up in the event of emergency situations or critical serious incidences involving program participants, program managers, staff, interns, contractors, or volunteers, as well as program closure and or the need to transfer or dispose of equipment. Furthermore, the program shall in writing notify the county, JCPC, Board of Directors, and DPS area office within 5 business days of being notified in the event the DPS JCPC funded agency receives notification of any tax liability, including fines and or penalties at the state or federal level. Section 4, Operations Program Reporting Requirements, now includes that JCPC programs notify the JCPC and DPS area office within 5 business days for possible follow-up in the event of emergency situations or critical serious incidences involving program participants, program managers, staff, interns, contractors, or volunteers, as well as program closure and or the need to transfer or dispose of equipment. Furthermore, it requires that in writing the program shall notify the county, JCPC, Board of Directors now, and DPS area office within 5 business days of being notified in the event that the DPS JCPC funded agency receives notification that is North Carolina nonprofit state and or 501c3 federal IRS status is revoked or suspended, as well as they shall notify in writing the county, JCPC, Board of Directors, and DPS area office within 5 business days of being notified that the agency has received notification of any tax liability, including fines and or penalties at the state or federal level. Section 4, Reporting Requirements, new policy includes the program should notify the JCPC and DPS area office within 5 business days for possible follow-up in the event of emergency situations or critical serious incidences involving program participants, program managers, staff, interns, contractors, or volunteers. Also, if the program is having to close and or there is need to transfer or dispose of equipment. Furthermore, in writing, the program shall notify the county. JCPC now includes Board of Directors when applicable, and DPS area office within 5 business days of being notified that the program's nonprofit state status or nonprofit federal IRS status is revoked or suspended. Also, in writing, the program shall notify the county, JCPC Board of Directors, and DPS area office within 5 business days of being notified that the agency has received notification of any tax liability, which includes fines and/or penalties at the state or federal level. Section 3, which covers the oversight and monitoring of programs, has been clarified to provide updated requirements and procedures related to non-critical program standard violations as well as critical program standard violations. Section 5, Program Accountability. The purpose is to establish minimum standards for appropriate care, treatment, insurance, and emergency planning for DPS JCPC funded programs. One of the new policies requires that newly funded programs must submit a copy of the current certificate of insurance to the DPS area office within 30 days of the DPS approval of the program agreement. Also, at a minimum, the new policy requires that programs shall maintain proof of professional liability insurance for professionals engaging in clinical treatment services.
We will continue on with program accountability and reviewing the critical standards that apply to all DPS JCPC funded programs. The next critical standard is juvenile safety and protection. When working with and transporting juveniles for program activities, the program is responsible for the juvenile's safety, supervision, and treatment at all times. Any activity, treatment, or programming that results in humiliation, verbal abuse, physical intimidation, fear, and/or physical pain is prohibited. Programs are also prohibited from making referrals to such programs. This would include a program such as Scared Straight. The next critical standard is regarding abuse, neglect, and dependency. North Carolina law protects juveniles under 18 years of age against abuse, neglect, and dependency. JCPC programs are considered mandated reporters and are required by law to report such instances to the Department of Social Services. Some instances of abuse might include serious physical injury that is not accidental, cruel, inappropriate discipline, sex crimes against a juvenile, or even human trafficking. Neglect might include juveniles not receiving proper care or supervision, abandoned, living in an injurious environment, or not provided medical care. Dependent juveniles are those who need assistance because they do not have a parent or guardian taking care of them, or the guardian is unable to provide and doesn't have alternatives for care. In such situations, any JCPC program that has a staff, intern, or volunteer under investigation for abuse or neglect, or has been charged with a criminal offense, will need to notify the DPS area office immediately, ensure the juvenile's safety, transfer the caseload to another staff, and keep the DPS consultant updated regarding the investigation. It is also important to include in your policy age-appropriate developmental stipulations, ensuring that interventions are at all times developmentally appropriate. Programs will need to have a strong knowledge of child development and include best practices for effective teaching approaches and strategies. Moving on to firearms and other weapons. It is important to note that this policy does not apply to on-duty law enforcement personnel who are subject to security and treatment concerns. Firearms and weapons are prohibited on the premises of any services delivery site or in any transportation vehicle. Juveniles, their parents and guardians, and visitors shall not be allowed to bring firearms or other weapons to program activities. This also applies to off-duty law enforcement personnel that may volunteer or work for programs funded by DPS. And for further clarification, Premises is defined as the area of any building where juveniles in the JCPC funded program are served. Management policy. All DPS JCPC funded programs must have a written policy detailing how they will manage youth behaviors and discipline. The policy must determine appropriate discipline, taking into consideration the juvenile's age, intelligence, emotional competency, clinical status, and past experiences. The policy must have a clear set of rules and expected behavior, as well as responses to juvenile behavior. The following are prohibited: physical or corporal punishment, use of physical restraint, unless the program staff are trained to implement physical restraint and intervention. Policy prohibits placement of a juvenile in a locked room or secure place, prohibits denial of meals, nourishment, or the performance of bodily functions as a form of punishment. Mechanical restraints, such as handcuffs and shackles, are prohibited. Use of force is prohibited unless necessary to protect the juvenile from harm or physical injury to self or others. Programs must use best practice or evidence-based practice or models for behavior modification strategies. There have been additional updates to policy regarding juvenile publicity. Pictures and/or other means of identifying juveniles may not be used in publicity activities or social media posts unless there is a written consent for publicity signed by the parent or guardian. A new separate signed consent must be obtained every time it will be used. So if the program is having a Thanksgiving event, there will need to be a new separate permission for a Christmas event. The permission statements must be maintained in the agency files and include at least the following: the purpose or intended use, a disclaimer that once information is posted to the internet, how it may be accessed by others in the future is not guaranteed by the program, as well as approval signatures from the youth and the parent. The next critical standard that must be included and adhered to in JCPC funded programs policy is regarding visits to private residence professional boundaries. Professional boundaries are a must. The professional relationship between program staff and juveniles and/or their parents being served by the program is the only relationship that matters while the juvenile is enrolled in the program. The program must maintain and protect professional boundaries. In doing so, juveniles are not allowed to visit program staff homes under any circumstances. Also, program staff should only visit a juvenile or their parent's home in a professional capacity. The only exception to this are mentoring programs.
JCPC 6, Program Eligibility for Funding, expands the requirement of a program to have 75% of their operating budget. First-year applicants must demonstrate that at least 75% of the total cash operating budget, including requested JCPC funds, is available, committed, third-party billable, or are provided by the sponsoring agency. Applicants must provide to the JCPC evidence by way of an award or commitment letter from a foundation or other grants they've applied for, and/or eligibility to bill or draw down Medicaid or other third-party payments, and any MOU or MOA contracts and/or documentation of available unrestricted agency funds for the remaining balance of the funding necessary for program operation. JCPC 7, Audit Requirements, eases the requirement on private nonprofit agencies to have all checks signed by two parties. Now, with the established disbursement limit, which that language has been in policy for a long time, it will continue to be there. Once you have an established disbursement limit that's approved by the program's governing body, any expense that would exceed that approved limit would have two options. One, they can either have two persons designated by the board to approve in writing that purchase, or they can use a check signed by two persons for any expense that exceeds the board-approved limit. In JCPC 9, Final Accounting and JCPC 10 Program Agreement Process. There have been sections of both of those that have been moved to JCPC 1 Operations. In JCPC Final Accounting, that entire transfer and disposal of equipment has been moved to JCPC 1, and over in JCPC 10, Program Agreement Process has been moved to JCPC 1. JCPC 11, Program Agreement Revision Process, elaborates on the requirement for revisions and how they're to be approved. Number 1, elimination of a function or modification of staffing. Number 2, assignment of a staff member to a service delivery function not included in the previous program agreement. Those would be both editing your program contract. So of course you would need a revision for that. Item 3, budget adjustments that transfer funds between cost centers. And 4, change in revenues. These are generally approved only by your JCPC chair and your county finance person prior to implementing them in Allies. Item 5, in-county transfers between JCPC funded programs. That needs county JCPC approval. Usually you're going to seek that in a JCPC meeting. And then item 6, request for DPS discretionary, would also require JCPC approval. If you look at the note, it kind of specifies again that items 1, 2, 5, and 6 would require JCPC and the county prior to requesting approval from DPS to approve those revisions. And then of course final approval of all revisions is required to implement the revision. And then for items 3 and 4 above, only notification of the revision submission and Allies is required to the JCPC chair and the county. Of course, you're going to want to verify in your county what their processes are for approving revisions. For the program-specific policies, they start at JCPC 12 and go through 22. The primary thread through all of these is the requirement for direct staff to have at least 12 hours of professional continuing education in an area related to the service type provided. Previously, this was in policy, and it's kind of back again with a little bit more clarification. This is going to apply to full and part-time staff and volunteers providing direct services. That's the key, direct services. It does not apply to the adult volunteer who happens to show up with their child at teen court and help you monitor kids during a teen court session. Other program-specific changes are related to the name of sex offender treatment programming, which was changed to problem sexual behavior. Referral, admission, and termination processes have been revised for clarification in several policies. Adult volunteers supervising or transporting juveniles has been revised in several policies. And then some policies had dosage and duration revisions. Restitution and community service parameters were revised, and then of course law enforcement was added as a referral source to that program type. General policy questions that you may have after viewing the training can be directed to your consultant. More specific policy feedback should be directed to the area consultant with an email that specifies your concern, and then the area consultant in return will provide that information to the policy committee. The policy training verification was provided along with the link to the training. Please complete that and return it to the area office by emailing it to Denise Bond, and feel free to copy your area consultant. We appreciate your assistance in implementing the policy going forward and appreciate your attendance today.